This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember, 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Welcome back to the X-Zone, everyone. My name is Rob McConnell, and we are coming to you live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and around the world on our growing list of affiliates across Canada, the United States, Central America, the Caribbean, South America, the Pacific Rim, 24 Asian countries, and across Europe. If you'd like to give us a call, our toll-free number is 1-877-528-8255. That is toll-free throughout the U.S., Canada, Alaska, and Hawaii. My email address, xzone@talkstarradio.com. On MSN Messenger, talkstarradio@hotmail.com, and our websites, www.xzoneradio.com and xzonetv.com. My producer tonight at Master Control, the home of the Talkstar Radio Network in Titusville, Florida, is our good friend Danny Zuko. And my guest this hour is a gentleman who knows more about evil than the Poppy family does, and the Poppy family brought us into this segment with their song Where Evil Grows. My guest this hour is a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Stone. And what is it that drives some people to commit heinous crimes? It's a question that society has grappled with for many years now, and now our guest, the renowned forensic psychiatrist Michael Stone, believes that he may have found an answer as to what makes someone truly evil. Now, he also thinks that there is a good chance for many people who are classified as evil to be redeemed and made into a productive member of society. Dr. Stone has studied more than 600 violent criminals in the course of his career and found two dominant personality traits in all of them: narcissism and aggression. He has used his research to create a 22-level hierarchy of evil behavior, which loosely based on the structure of Dante's Inferno. Dr. Michael Stone is a professor of clinical psychiatry at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons and hosted the series Most Evil, which aired on Discovery Channel. He has also been featured in the New York Times, CNN, NBC News, and several prominent professional magazines. His latest book is The Anatomy of Evil. And Dr. Michael Stone, it's a pleasure having you here on the X-Zone, sir.
Well, thank you.
Tell me, is evil a humanistic trait, or does it have something to do with what many people believe is Satan, the paranormal?
No, I don't think it has anything to do with the paranormal. I think it's a purely human trait, and I think we're the only animal on the planet that is capable of evil.
The only animal on the planet that is capable of evil. Why is that, sir?
Well, because evil has to do usually with violent crime, but some kind of crime or subjection of some other person, to humiliation, degradation, with the knowledge of what the person is suffering, and even the knowledge that there's a finality to life, and therefore you may even abbreviate that person's life. I think when a leopard chases a gazelle, it's just having its supper.
Right.
It has no malice against the gazelle any more than the cat has malice against the mouse. But we, on the other hand, because of our big brain, this big frontal lobe, that we have consciousness and we have awareness of these things, we can know that we're doing something awful, to another person, or even to one of our pets or another animal.
Dr. Stone, please stand by. It's a pleasure having you with us tonight, sir. Dr. Michael Stone is our very special guest, www.michaelstonemd.com. The good doctor and I return on the other side of this 2-minute break as the X Zone continues right here on Talkstar.
Take a step back in time and discover old Florida cuisine at Marsh Landing Restaurant in Fellsmere. Enjoy delicacies such as frog legs, gator tail, catfish, and swamp cabbage, or enjoy the more traditional cuisine like hand-cut Angus steaks, ribs, and seafood. Join us for breakfast with a southern flair featuring sweet potato pancakes, biscuits and gravy, and much more. Planning a party? Marsh Landing's private dining room can accommodate groups from 8 to 80 people. While you're visiting, enjoy the historic pictures, artifacts, and stories that line the walls. Marsh Landing is truly a unique experience. Marsh Landing Restaurant, 44 North Broadway in historic Fellsmere, or visit marshlandingrestaurant.com. Marsh Landing, Old Florida cuisine at its best.
Are you interested in the paranormal, ghosts, UFOs, or psychic phenomenon? Join me, Tim Bartley, co-host of Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, coming mid-January 2017 to the XZBN. We will channel spirits live and talk to them, revealing all kinds of amazing information. Spiritual attachments will be found and removed on the show, and so much more. To find out when you can listen to Talking to Spirits with Lightworkers Tim and Justina, visit www.xzbn.net for listeners on both sides of the veil.
Dr. Michael Stone is our special guest. He is the author of a new book that is out entitled The Anatomy of Evil. His website is www.michaelstonemd.com. Tell me, Doctor, how have you defined evil for the purposes of your book?
Well, I defined it in a way that I thought brings it down to earth and very far away from Satan and anything supernatural. Mm-hmm. And I used the word the way the public uses it, and the way prosecuting attorneys, journalists, true crime writers, judges use the word evil in everyday life. In other words, people used to feel, and some people I think still feel, that evil is a word that only God can pronounce, or maybe some very special philosopher or religious person, and that the rest of us don't even have the right to use it. But of course, when you listen to people, they use it all the time. Just as a beautiful example from the last week is this fellow out in California who kidnapped and raped this poor girl when she was 11, kept her prisoner for 18 years, sired 2 children by her, and raped other people, and was sent to prison but then released ridiculously early, and tried to gouge the eyes out of his first wife. That bit of news came just this evening. And I think the average reaction, and certainly my reaction, to that is, wow, that's evil.
Yes.
People, and then if you read these true crime books, as I've read them, by the hundreds, I catalog the number of times and the places where the word evil is used, and it's almost invariably used to describe something which is shocking, disgusting, horrifying, takes your breath away. In other words, it induces an emotional reaction, these horrific acts, and evil is the word we often use, the first word that comes out of our mouth when we're forced to hear or listen or see these kinds of violent acts.
So evil is, like you said earlier, a humanistic trait.
Yes.
Evil is a topic most psychiatrists shy away from, Doctor. What got you started in studying evil in a serious way and giving its legitimacy as a subject for research?
Well, I was asked just a little over 20 years ago to be an expert witness because of my specialty and expertise in personality disorders.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I started out my career in psychoanalysis, and then I got to be interested in borderline and other personalities, so that when sometimes a law case comes across some attorney's desk, and somebody is described as antisocial or narcissistic or borderline or whatever, they may call me in. And in this particular case, 20 years ago, I was asked, to tell whether Joe McGinnis, the author, in describing the fatal vision doctor that killed his pregnant wife, stabbed to death his pregnant wife and 2 daughters, was narcissistic and antisocial. That was my task, to basically back up McGinnis's right and privilege, to use those terms, whereas McGinnis, the killer, McConnell, even though he was already in prison, managed to sue McGinnis on the grounds that, hey, you said we'd share royalty money and you've defamed my character, because he was excused in the first trial, but more evidence was found, and McGinnis got fooled, and he realized that he was conned by this guy. And so he broke his friendship and wrote the book, telling it like it was. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to show the jury where a crime like that, stabbing to death your pregnant wife and 2 daughters, fit in the grand scheme or the grand spectrum of terrible acts, that shock us. And I figured, well, it's a heck of a lot worse than Gene Harris at that time, who achieved a certain notoriety for shooting to death in a crime of passion, the Scarsdale diet doctor who was having an affair with and who cheated on her. She discovered another woman's panties in an adjacent drawer to hers, and she shot him to death. That's a crime of passion, and all of us can understand it, sympathize with it. We know it's wrong. She knew it was wrong. So that was at the gentlest level of evil, if you want to look at it that way. At the other end, I noticed at that time that Ian Brady and his girlfriend, Myra Hindley, in the Moors, that very remote part of England, had lured children to their cottage, and Ian then would strangle them and record their screams on a tape recorder and use it as a kind of an aphrodisiac later as a sexual turn-on, with his girlfriend. And that torture of the children and degrading, that disgusting use of their screams, as a sexual turn-on, struck me as the worst thing I'd ever heard of at that time. I have since heard worse, but at that time that was, the opposite end of the scale I was beginning to create. And the more that I read about these kind of cases, and then later the more I got to be familiar and went around the country for Discovery Channel actually interviewing some of these people, the more compartments or levels I added until I ended up with that 22-point scale.
Can a person be born evil, or is there such a thing as a bad seed, or are there always multiple factors present in the kinds of people who commit acts that we call evil?
Well, I think there is such a thing as bad seed. I think it's quite rare, but I don't think anyone is born evil to the extent that you could look in the nursery and say, oh, that baby, watch out, buddy, that one's going to be evil. No. And I got a lot of flack from one particular reviewer of the book for Amazon that said, well, of course there are people who are born evil. Look, there's a hereditary factor to psychopathy, which is, of course, quite correct. And if she bothered to read the rest of the book, she would find out that I very well said that. Mm-hmm. But even though there are people who are born with a hereditary inclination to become psychopaths, which means callous, lacking feeling, no compassion, no remorse, and so on, you can't tell which ones are going to do violent crimes versus which ones are going to sell you in a Ponzi scheme. I mean, Madoff was described by the judge who sentenced him. He said, Mr. Madoff, you are an extraordinary evil man. And he's the only person that I've come across in a nonviolent crime, but where the crime was so horrific, so many people were so hurt so terribly by his swindling, that even he was considered evil, but he never laid a hand on anyone. So many of the psychopaths who will, sell you fake Rolex watches on the street corner, or get you involved in one of those shell games, where you try to guess which pea is under the shell. They're often psychopaths too, but they're nonviolent, and you wouldn't call them evil. But so evil is something that a certain proportion of people, maybe 1.5%, are born with an inclination toward, but in order for it to come to full flower, as it were, it depends on many chance events later, so that some of them are brutalized, by their parents, some are not. The ones that interest me the most are the ones that came, especially were adopted into fairly normal, devoted, caring, warm homes, and then ended up doing terrible things anyway, which means that there must be a very strong factor from birth, complications, or heredity that nudged them in the direction of doing those things.
Is it fair to label a person evil as opposed to just the act or actions he or she carries out?
Well, I think most of us who accept the idea that evil exists and so on prefer to label the acts as evil, and we shy away from calling a person evil unless the person is one of these rather extreme individuals like Gary Doe, however he says his name, out in California, who was doing something horrific day in and day out every day of his life, at least since adulthood. In other words, he was cruel and sadistic to his first wife. He raped women. He may have even killed, we don't know about that yet, but we think he may have killed a number of prostitutes. Then he kidnapped this poor little 11-year-old, sired 2 kids by her, kept her as a slave, for 18 years. So people would rather readily say he's an evil man because the quality of doing these horrific things just runs through the whole course of his life, which is very different from, let's say, a man who plots and schemes to kill his wife by pushing her car off a cliff or something like that, and then pretending it was an accident. That's a terrible thing. It's a one-off, but he may have been in other respects, a upstanding businessman and a decent father, so you wouldn't call him evil across the board.
How did you create your scale that you call the graduations of evil, and what kinds of graduations are there?
Well, I began creating it in order to educate the jury back in that McDonnell-McGinnis case. And as I mentioned, I wanted to show the jury, something about the length and breadth of the spectrum of these terrible acts, each level being something worse or more breathtaking, if you will, than the other. I started out, as I said, with first of all, my level 1 is not evil at all. I anchored it to a level that has nothing to do with evil, but rather justified homicide or killing in self-defense, which is not murder. Number 2 was the crime of passion. And the people in the first levels, you could say they're united by the quality of doing what they do out of impulse or in an immediate reaction. Somebody insults them in a bar and they take a chair and slam it over their head, and they killed a person. Maybe they didn't even know that the person was dead or mean to, but nevertheless, it's a violent act. But it wasn't planned and wasn't done with malice aforethought. When you get up around the middle numbers, 9, 10, 11, and beyond, you're usually dealing with people who have strong psychopathic traits or maybe full-blown psychopathy, as defined, by the great psychologist Robert Hare in Vancouver and his colleagues, who developed this 20-point, or that's a 20-item scale. It can go all the way from 0 to 40, and if you score 30 or above, you're considered a psychopath. If you're in the 20s, you have psychopathic traits, and the key qualities, at least the way I look at it, are these intense narcissistic traits of deceitfulness, manipulativeness, callousness, utter lack of compassion, a lack of remorse for anything that you do, and refusal to take
Doctor,
responsibility.
stand by. We've got to take our news break at the bottom of the
Okay.
hour. Dr. Michael Stone is our guest, and we'll be back on the other side of the news break. Don't go away.
Whether you're a believer or a skeptic, the X-Zone Apple iPod is just the tool when investigating the world of the paranormal, the science of parapsychology, watching or listening to your favorite episode of the X-Zone, or just surfing the net. Just imagine music that looks as good as it sounds, touch your movies, photos, and more. Internet in your pocket. Play games like never before. Push email, push calendar, push contacts for iPod Touch. Your X-Zone iPod will be shipped to you in its Apple packaging and include everything that you will need to start enjoying an iPod adventure that is truly out of this world and covered by Apple's warranty. As a very special introductory offer, the 8GB X-Zone Apple iPod can be yours for the incredible price of $275. That's right, $275. To order your X-Zone Apple iPod, go to www.xzoneipod.com. That's www.xzoneipod.com. Order your X-Zone Apple iPod today. Douglas James Cottrell, who has been called Canada's Edgar Casey, has just made available his latest CD, Douglas Cottrell 2012 Earth Changes, the first CD in the 2012 Prophecy series. This session features information gathered from the Akashic Records in a deep trance meditation session by Douglas James Cottrell in March of 2009. In this session, Douglas explains changes that have taken place in the Earth's core, changes to the Earth's poles, and the real reason why the polar caps are melting. Douglas also elaborates on increased volcanic and earthquake activity between now and 2012, including what, where, and when. To order your copy of Douglas Cottrell 2012 Earth Changes, visit his website at douglasjamescottrell.com or call toll-free 877-COTTREL.
This is the X-Zone Broadcast Network, broadcasting worldwide on broadcast affiliates and satellite program providers, including CNN Broadcast Network, Sirius Satellite Network, Star Media, Good News Radio Network, Angel Broadcast Network, Wiki Broadcast Network, and WPBN TV. For more information on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, visit us at www.xzbn.net.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
Dr. Michael Stone is my very special guest this hour. His website is www.michaelstonemd.com, and he's the author of The Anatomy of Evil. Doctor, the persons that you describe in your book often bear the label psychopath. Is psychopathy the red thread that runs through most cases? And anyway, how do you define psychopathy?
Well, it's the red thread that runs through a great many, because psychopathy can be considered the far end of a scale of narcissism. In other words, these are egocentric people to the max. And the way Robert Hare and his colleagues in Vancouver have defined it, and it's used by so many people around the world, the characteristics are these. The person is often superficially charming, the way Ted Bundy was. It can, get the birds down from the trees, and glib in speech, very grandiose. They're manipulative and exploitative of other people. They con other people, fool other people. They don't have remorse for the terrible things that they do, or any of the things that they do. They're callous. Their emotions are very shallow. They don't have compassion, and the lack of remorse is also combined with an inability to take responsibility for their actions. They also have some behavioral qualities, impulsivity and sponging off people and things like that. The lack of compassion is a very key quality because it means that you can see somebody who's like a little kid in a store, or who's gotten separated from his mom, who's crying and obviously upset. An average person will go over and try to bring the kid, to the information booth, or get on the microphone and have the police, get the mom and reunite with their child. The psychopath can tell that the kid's sad, but he says, "Aha, here's an opportunity," and we can say, "Hey, kid, I bet you got separated from your mom." And the kid might say, yeah, I did. Well, let me help you get to her. And then takes him by the hand, but instead of taking the child, to the information booth or whatever, takes him outside in his car and kidnaps him. That may have been the kind of thing that this Garrido did. And so that he seizes an opportunity, and in a very, malefic, you might say evil way, I would say an evil way, to take advantage of the suffering person, whereas the average person is very moved by it and will do the right thing. So those are the qualities of the psychopath. And at the very end of my scale, when you not only have psychopaths who plot and scheme, to hurt others or kill others, get them out of their way, things like that, you have the sadistic psychopath, which means, and the essence of sadism is the enjoyment of the suffering of somebody. So that if you build a torture chamber in your home, like Leonard Lake and David Parker Ray and Bob Berdella and some of these serial killers who were really into torture in a big way, they take great delight in subjecting their victims to prolonged and really nauseating kinds of torture.
Oh, that's sick.
Yes.
That is truly sick. Doctor, serial killers are highlighted in your book to quite an extent. Are men who commit serial sexual homicide all cut from the same cloth, or is it a question of variations on a theme?
I think it's variations on a theme because although many of them have this quality of enjoyment, actually is getting sexually turned on, by the death of the victim or the rape of the victim. Nevertheless, there are some of them who have very little in the way of abnormal home environment. They didn't fall on their head. They didn't abuse drugs, etc., etc. And those are the rare ones. Most of them have a multiple risk factors, so that they may be born with this tendency to psychopathy. But then, in addition, they have parents that were abusive or neglectful or cruel, which then made them very angry and want to get back at the world or get back at women or get back at men or whatever. And then some of them, in addition, have had severe head injury with unconsciousness when they were kids, in such a way that their key areas in the front part of the brain that have to do with social decision-making and feeling compassion are disturbed, or maybe even really pretty much ruined. So then that becomes a very special factor in a certain number of these people. Many of them abuse drugs of a sort that lower inhibition, so that they often prime the pump, as you will, by alcohol or cocaine or marijuana or something, so that they might feel like doing something. As I'm going to go out and get me a woman and drag her back to the place, but they don't quite have the gumption to do it unless they take half a bottle of vodka or do a line of cocaine. So that the drugs, as a matter of fact, this guy out in California apparently made himself very strange, even stranger than he was already, by repeated use of LSD when he was a young adult. So that becomes another factor. But there are some men among the serial killers who really were pretty normal, didn't have, as far as we can tell, the tendency genetically to psychopathy, came from a nice home, but they fell on their head and they underwent a tremendous change in personality after the head injury with unconsciousness. Like this fellow, Richard Sterrett, down in Georgia, when he was about 11. And after that injury, he became preoccupied with pornographic magazines. He had sadistic sexual fantasies. He stalked women, and then as he got older, he did marry and have a daughter. But then he left his wife and had a mistress. And when the mistress found out that he was still married, he killed her and went and then killed 10 other women in Georgia and South Carolina. He even had a measure of remorse, unlike most of the serial killers. So the fact that he came from a fairly normal family made him a little bit different from the others, but the only real factor that he had was this head injury. Now, that's uncommon, but when you talk about variations on the theme, that was his variation.
Dr. Michael Stone is our special guest. His website is www.michaelstonemd.com, and he is the author of a new book entitled The Anatomy of Evil. Now, did your work as host for Discovery Channel, the series Most Evil, for which you did many, many interviews with notorious prisoners, Doctor, change your opinion about some of those people?
Absolutely.
Or about your views on evil itself?
Yes, it did. I found that there were some people, for instance, on death row in Texas and Florida, who I felt very much deserved to be where they were, like Noel Durball down in Florida. And there were others who I felt were salvageable people, but because they killed a number of people at once, the courts were not organized in such a way as to say, well, okay, it was a pretty bad thing, but, you're basically a good guy, so we'll give you a 10-year sentence, and that'll be that. The one, as a matter of fact, I just got a letter from this fellow, Wayne Coy Westbrook in Texas. I've been corresponding since I saw him. He was estranged from his wife, and the wife invited him to her apartment as if for, kind of a reunification. But it was all to mock him. And when he went over there, he discovered that she was having sex with 2 men at once, and there were 2 other people in the front room making fun of Wayne. Well, here was a man that worked hard all his life, a working man, put bread on the table when he was married to her, and he was just so humiliated and enraged that he went out to his truck and got his rifle, which I guess every full-blooded man in Texas has, and he just blew them all away with 5 shots. And I think if he had just killed either the wife who was having sex with the man or the man who was having sex with his wife, probably in Texas he would have gotten maybe 6 months with a little time off for good behavior, because there was 5 bodies that they couldn't look the other way, so they put him on death row. But he was a decent person. He was not a psychopath. And people from around the country, when they saw my interview, wrote in to the death row unit down there in Livingston, Texas, and asked, couldn't this person be given a stay? And I hope that actually happens. It may happen. And he was very grateful to me. He was aware that a lot of people had written in, etc. And so I've been corresponding about that. And he's a very different man, from some of the other really psychopathic, cold-blooded sadists that I also interviewed, and about whom I had no compunctions about their fate, and I think I could very well have pulled a switch myself.
Tell me, why is it that men greatly outnumber women among the ranks of persons committing evil acts?
Well, I think our testosterone is a factor. Don't forget, when you think about how we evolved, from those plains, the savannas of Africa 50,000 years ago, before we got out of there and began to populate the rest of the world, men and women perform very different functions. The men acted like male lions do, to stake out the perimeter and say, this is our turf. And you invade our turf at your own peril. Men are stronger. They are pretty good at, taking a bow and arrow and, hitting a target. The women are there in the middle of the group. The groups are often rather small, groups of 100, 150 people, and they're taking care of the kids and cooking and all this and that. So they have more compassion, more feeling, women have to understand, which cry means the kid is wet, which one means is hungry. Men defend the group. And so you take that to an extreme, and now you have a very violent man. So it's and that our testosterone levels help with that, and so on. So that men in that way are really 5, 6, 7, 8 times more likely to do a violent act than a woman.
Who are some of the people you would put at the very top of your scale, and what made you decide that they were the most horrific of the whole group?
Well, there's one that stands out in my mind is John Ray Weber in Wisconsin. The things he did, are so repugnant that you really can't talk about them too freely on the radio. He basically lured and kidnapped his own sister-in-law when she was just an adolescent, and took her to a remote place in the woods, shoved very large objects in her different orifices, and then, meantime, she's tied to a tree and she has duct tape around her eyes. He then ripped off the duct tape so that she could see what was happening to her, took a knife, and began slicing her breasts like salami slices. I mean, it's just, you could hardly read about that, without just flinching and wincing. It's just awful. Now, David Parker Ray in New Mexico built a torture chamber to which he would lure, women with the help of a female accomplice, and subject them to unspeakable tortures for we don't even know how long, days, weeks, months, and so those are really the worst of the worst. And Leonard Lake, who made snuff films of some of the women he captured and bound and so on, and he did the kind of sadistic things that the Nazis used to do in the camps. For instance, he captured one woman who had a baby. Unbeknownst to her, he had already killed a baby. But then he said, we'll call her, give her a name. He says, Brenda, you can, here you are, you're our captive now. You can cook for us. You can, wash for us, and you can, have sex with us, and use a much stronger word. You can do that, or you can say, no, I don't want to do that, in which case we'll just take you out and shoot you. Your choice. Now imagine giving somebody that kind of Sophie's choice, where she has to make up her mind, as I suppose. Well, I know for a fact that the Joseph Fritzl in Vienna, or in Austria, gave his own daughter, when he dragged her down to that bunker he built under the house, he chained her to a pipe down there and said, you can have sex or with me and be my sex slave, or if you don't want to do that, I'll just let you starve to death here. Your choice.
Oh, God.
I mean, that's the fact that you gasp is exactly the reaction that I had and everybody else had when they hear about these things. It's an emotional reaction, and the first word, out of your mouth usually is, God, that's evil. And so those are pretty much the worst that I've come across, although this guy Garrido is running, a pretty close second, this character in California.
Doctor, stand by. You and I have to take our final break for this hour. Dr. Michael Stone is our very special guest. He is a forensic psychiatrist. He's also the author of The Anatomy of Evil. His website, Exonation, www.michaelstonemd.com. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with a good doctor as we continue live and around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network from our studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada.
19 starting check. Officers on the scene.
Hi, I'm Larry Lawson, host of Paranormal Stakeout. With over 36 years in law enforcement, I have learned a few things. The most important is the proper gathering and preservation of evidence is vital to putting the bad guy behind bars. It's no different in the world of paranormal investigation. Whether it's the search for the afterlife, cryptozoology, UFOs, and extraterrestrials, how we gather the evidence, preserve that evidence, and present it to a jury of our peers will make the ultimate difference in proving the existence of worlds and entities that are beyond our imagination. Join me, Larry Lawson, every week on Paranormal Stakeout when, along with my guests, we'll take a journey to prove with indisputable evidence what man has struggled to believe for centuries. Go to xzbn.net for the broadcast schedule and check me out at paranormalstakeout.com.
I am Dr. Carl O'Helvey, founder, president of a new cancer foundation focusing on evidence-based physical, mental, and spiritual interventions, including natural cancer cures, prayer, meditation, affirmations, nutrition, and other related holistic cancer prevention and cure modalities. These are used in cancer education, research, and financing care. I ask for your help to continue this important work by donating at www.holisticcancerfoundation.com.
You're listening to the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
Dr. Michael Stone is our special guest. He is the author of The Anatomy of Evil. His website is www.michaelstonemd.com. Doctor, what has modern brain science contributed to our understanding of the kinds of persons who are prone to commit the acts we label as evil?
Well, I think that what in the last 10 years we've begun to learn are a number of things. First of all, there are areas of the brain that have to do with our sexual responsiveness, and if they're damaged, certain areas in the more primitive parts of the brain and even some of the more advanced parts of the brain, if they're damaged, the person may be predisposed to have abnormal outlets and desire to have sex and to hurt children rather than to have sex with age-appropriate age mates. So that we used to think that pedophiles were maybe grown-up men, who had been sexually misused when they were children, or they witnessed some peculiar sexual things going on in the family. We didn't have too good of an explanation for it, but we now know from work in Europe in particular that many pedophiles, particularly homosexual pedophiles, but some of the heterosexual ones as well, have brain abnormalities that seem to underlie, their abnormal predilection. Then we know from the work of James Blair in Canada that the certain portions of the brain in the more primitive parts of the brain, the amygdala, that are sensitive, to emotions, including, fear, like the example I gave before of the kid who's crying, that there seem to be diminished or abnormal in some way, so that the person doesn't have the normal response, to the distress of other human beings. So that's another factor that predisposes, and neuroscience has begun to catch on to that also in the last 10, 15 years.
Tell me, Doctor, can these people who are truly evil be rehabilitated?
Well, I think the ones who are day in, day out evil, especially the ones that have kidnapped children, like this guy in California, or Josef Fritzl in Austria, where their whole life has been consecrated, if you will, to hurting and distorting and ruining the lives of other people. I think they're beyond the pale, and you can't really rehabilitate them. This fellow that I interviewed and several others for the program, that were in prison for a long time, who were not psychopaths. In other words, they'd done a terrible thing, but they were not psychopathic. They had feelings. They felt remorse. They cried when they told me their story. I think they were rehabilitatable. There's some I know for a fact were rehabilitatable because they were now finally released, and I interviewed them in their own home and things like that, and they were living very good lives trying to help other people and stuff. So there's a portion of them that are definitely salvageable, but then there's the hardcore psychopaths, especially who've racked up a very large number of horrific acts that I think are not salvageable.
Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a great pleasure talking to you. I wish you continued success, sir, and I look forward to the next time, Doctor, when you and I meet here in the X Zone.
Well, I would look forward to it also, and thank you very much for having me on the program.
It's my great pleasure, sir. Take care of yourself, and thank you for all the great work that you're doing, Doctor.
Thank you. Dr.
Michael Stone has been our guest this hour. He is the author of The Anatomy of Evil. His website, www.michaelstonemd.com. That's www.michaelstonemd.com. When I come back from this commercial break at the top of the hour at 6.5 minutes past, Michel Belanger will be joining me. We're going to be talking about vampires, the paranormal, and the television show that she is now part of, Paranormal State, as the X Zone continues right here on the Talkstar Radio Network.